everyone. Thanks for coming. This is our inaugural show of our Lower East Side space and our first talk. So it's great to have you all. We're going to be doing a talk with Lisa Pressman, and then we're going to go downstairs, and James Isherwood, who is the other artist whose work is downstairs. I'll do a brief Q&A with him, so I hope you'll brave the spiral staircase and come down there as well. I want to introduce Presley Parker, who's
I'm the gallery assistant here.
really runs operations here, so couldn't have done it without her. Hi, we have a few chairs here if you want to sit or prefer to stand. So I just want to do a brief intro of Lisa. I've known Lisa since 2011 when her work was curated into an exhibition in my Uptown gallery on encaustic artists. And one of our artists named Amber George asked me if she could curate a show with just work, encaustic work by a variety of artists, and that's when I met Lisa. And since then, we've curated shows of her work in the Upper West Side Gallery, in our Hudson space, and now here. And it's wonderful to have known her all these years and do studio visits. And Lisa got her BA in Douglas College and Rutgers, and then did her MFA at Bard College. And I'm going to let Audra speak about her practice, but what really struck me the first time I met Lisa was her work with encaustic, which was a medium I didn't know much about 10 years ago. But most of the work in this room is encaustic based. Audra Lambert, who I've just met for the first time, Lisa asked if we could do this talk with Audra, and I'm honored that you're here. She's a New Yorker, born in New Orleans. She's an independent curator, artist coach, and art critic. She's founder-curator of Antecedent Projects, a New York-based curatorial consultancy focused on site-specific projects throughout the 5 boroughs and in urban New Jersey. Throughout her career, Lambert has written proposals for various art nonprofits throughout the city. She served as curatorial manager of art in Odd Places 2018, Body, as a project coordinator for More Art, spearheading projects with artists Dred Scott, Andy Wilson, and Sari Carell. She's curated exhibits all over the city, including at La Esquina, Yeshiva University Museum Center for Jewish History, the Arsenal Gallery, the Parks Department, and many more. So without further ado.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for braving the cold. It's gotten very chilly.
And the Santa cone.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that today. Yeah, I thought it'd be nice to talk about, so we met through the work that I do, through the consulting work that I do through Ninth Street Collective, but I was very impressed by Lisa's work and also her vibrant mind, because she does many things across her practice as an artist, and she also finds ways to really extend it out to the wider arts community. So I don't want to brag on you too much because I don't want to make you feel, but I do just really feel honored to be here, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And I want to learn more about the show and the works on you here, because I think it's representative of a certain aspect of your practice, which is actually much wider. It extends in many directions and thoughts and elements. So if you haven't seen Lisa's work before, I'm sure she'd be happy to talk one-on-one after about it in more detail and more depth. Okay, great. So with that being said, so let's focus on the works here, because that's where we're at. So Lisa, in these works on view, they're primarily from your messages and exploration series. So you are really in dialogue with certain themes in this series, and I wanted you to expand on these and also maybe talk a bit about just really what is the genesis for these bodies of work.
So what Audra is referring to is this body of work here, and also what's on the wall with the magnets. They are, this body of work I started in right after COVID, right in the middle of COVID. And it was I guess what happened to a lot of us when COVID hit was like, what now? What am I gonna do now? And I really was in a place of, what does this all mean? I don't know what to do. And I did a little research into my collection of stuff. And I found handmade paper that I collected, letter set, I also had been teaching a class called Contemplative Practices in Art and also Visual Record. So I was looking at a lot of work with artists that cut, that use fire, that burn, that sew. So between all of that, these messages, they started out as, I called them the unmotivated drawings. Because I was told, that's how I felt, like I had to drag myself off the couch. I'm just gonna go down the studio for an hour and I'm gonna do 4 things and then I'm gonna come up. So that is where these came from. And then last year in January, there's 8 of them hanging there.
This is the exploration.
Explorations, and they really are explorations. And what happened with those was that I gave myself an assignment because again, I was sitting in the studio going, now what? That seems to happen occasionally. Now what? So I gave myself 100 drawings, and I really was trying to break down. Like I could only use smoke on 10. I could only use thread. So really isolating those materials to figure out what it is and why and what it might all mean. And it took me to about 30 of them when I said, and just started working on all of them. I think I got to about 60 and then I got distracted with something else, which is what happens.
And are they all in that format as well? Do you want to talk a bit about the size?
Yeah, they were all 8 by 8. So again, there were parameters, 8 by 8s, only using a certain amount of material. I didn't know that I was going to show them. Susie and Liz, who did a studio visit, when I pulled them out, were like, "Oh yeah." So that's what happened with them. I think that they're when I get them back home, if they come back home, they're a genesis for some new work, for sure.
So this is from, you said, this past year, and these works are from about 2 years ago.
No, well, this is a continuing series.
Okay.
So most of the work in the gallery is from this year. This painting, I finished it this year, but it's 4 years old. It sat in my studio for 4 years, waiting for something to happen. And then the painting up in the front is from 20 or 19, I think. I can't remember. So, and then, yeah, so they're all from this year.
So just to reiterate, the messages and the exploration series are both ongoing.
Yes.
Okay.
I have several ongoing series.
Okay.
That's how I work.
Yes. So then I think that's a really helpful segue because you do have works here that are works on paper. You also have encaustic paintings on board. So I just wanted to get a sense, and you have an oil painting. So how do you view how you approach, for example, if it's a work on paper versus a work on board, how do you work with each of these formats? Like, are there things that overlap? Are they very different when you approach them?
Well, I think for, paper is just such a relief in a way to work on. There's a lot more freedom in working on paper. It's just the nature of the material. Plus, the sewing of it is really become important, and the idea of plus I'm using red thread, which has a ton of associations of sewing in and out, so it's like one side and the other side. So that's I think that's how they relate. The encaustic work is a lot of layering and covering up. They usually start like the drawings do, with lots of marks and things, and then I proceed to cover them up. Like those two up there are really a conceal and reveal kind of painting, where if you keep looking, you'll start seeing things that pop out. And those paintings really were, at some point when I decided that I was going to work on them to the end, I was really leaning into calm. That's really what I wanted, was calm.
And for anyone who is online and here with us, hi as well to you. These are the paintings at the edge 1 and at the edge 2.
Right.
Right. So do you have any ways in which you overlap? Like, for example, how you work with, because you mentioned sewing very explicitly, do you feel like you're trying to translate that somehow into like working in caustic painting?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's a different avenue. It's a different road. But what's interesting is that I remembered, somebody reminded me that I had been sewing on canvas when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
And I totally forgot about that. And I used to embroider. So that kind of brought me back to that. There is, when I look at these, I do think about bringing out canvas and working on unstretched canvas, and then bringing them more into a painting sensibility, but not with encaustic, because encaustic needs to be on boards.
And obviously that's a medium that you're very familiar with because you do teach in that field as well. I wanted to also bring up, so something that you and I have had a few conversations around is what the response is really to your work. So this is a bit of a long question, so please bear with me, but you work in abstraction and you often incorporate a sense of repetition. You have a lot of surface texture that you use as well, which is it just feels very visceral as you're looking at it. It's something that is immediately grasped. So like along with your sense of texture, you have sense of line, you have mark making. There are things that feel as though they are throughout a few bodies of work that you make. So what about abstraction and all of these like qualities of the surface? What about these qualities do you feel people respond to? Because you have mentioned that you've seen people have emotional, like really visceral responses to your work.
Well, I think, actually, I don't know if I made this word up, but viscerality. Is that a word? I don't know. I think that part of it is the visceral, the touch and the hand. With these particular works, because there's a ritual sense of them, I think that in terms of, I'm using smoke, the sewing, the letraset, which is repetition of some kind of communication. So I think people respond to that. And I'm a big proponent. I think color changes lives. So I think with these paintings, I think color can really change your mood, how you feel.
And so when you're mentioning, because I really liked how you said the word ritual, I feel like that's something I haven't heard really attached. Are you feeling like these like hold some kind of a meaning? Obviously they're called messages, so that is part of it, but I just wanted to get a sense of how you think they hold meaning.
Well, I think they're like artifacts. I'm not even sure about the framing of them exactly, but they feel like artifacts, something left behind. What do we leave behind? When you're using smoke and ash, it brings up lots of associations.
It has evocative qualities.
Yeah, evocative, yes.
Yeah. You were speaking about use of color, and I think of the painter Joan Mitchell, and I wanted you to share. We'd had a conversation about this incredible reflection from Joan Mitchell that you felt was important.
So if any of you go to Zerner, there's a Joan Mitchell show that's there for quite a while, for a few more weeks, and you walk into the space and there's just this incredible painting. I mean, when I saw it, I was just knocked over. And then I found this quote: "Painting is the opposite of death. It permits one to survive. It also permits one to live. For me, Chez Mazur, which is this painting that I'm talking about, is profoundly sad. It's sadness in full sunlight as there is joy in the rain." I just love that quote.
And he said the work itself feels very happy.
Yeah, the work
so
is
just like in contradiction to that.
It just, well, that's what I mean about color. That painting just fills you up. And then to hear her say how much there was profound sadness in it, I think that's a real nice dichotomy.
I think we could wrap by you maybe sharing how you feel that could apply to your own practice, not to maybe push you too much, but do you feel as though there's any kind of emotional qualities that you hope someone will walk away with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Want to share any of those?
Well, you know, I like beautiful paintings. They make you feel good. I mean, I went to see Kiefer, and I think that that's an amazing show. And if you know what I'm talking about, I mean, it's just tortured though. And I kind of feel that I'd rather not. We don't need to see more of that. We need to see beauty and calm and light. So.
What is it? The joy in the rain, if you will?
The joy in the rain. That's right.
Excellent. Well, I have no further questions for you unless you wanted to share anything about the
Oh,
show or upcoming shows.
Oh, I do have an upcoming show at the Painting Center of more of the messages, and that'll be in February.
Do you have an opening date?
I don't have an opening
Stay
date
tuned.
just yet.
Will you send a?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does anyone have questions? Now is the perfect time to open the floor up, I think.
Oh, is it February 2nd? Oh, the opening is on February 2nd.
So if the groundhog sees his shadow, then go to the painting center.
Is that a solo show?
No, it's 4 artists. Actually, one's right here. Chase Cantwell, Karen Nielsen-Freed, Mary Beth Rothman, and I. And we're 4 friends. So I don't know if anything else ties it together other than we're 4 friends from New Jersey. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I think we're also headed downstairs, so if you want to ask
Yes.
Lisa one-on-one as well, that's fine.
Sure.
Whatever is easiest for the format of today.
Yeah. So go downstairs and look at James' work, which is pretty wonderful.
Thank you for joining us on YouTube as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we are going to get started. So again, my name is Susan Eley. This is our inaugural show here on the Lower East Side. We have a gallery in Hudson, New York, and we had a gallery on the Upper West Side for 16 years that we moved down here just a month ago. So I've known Jim since 2008, where we did a show called Regarding Arcadia. It was a 3-person show. And it's been really fun to curate this show because we actually have a few pieces from that era. We have Highlander and Wedger. Where's Wedger? Behind here. And so these are from a long time ago, and then most of the work is from 2021, 2022. So in a way, this is a bit of a mini retrospective. And why we did that, I just felt like to introduce Jim to the Lower East Side, I wanted to show the thread of the work from over a decade ago and how he's come to be working today. We'll talk more about that. So Jim was born in 1971 in Fall River, Massachusetts, and went to Parsons and lives in Brooklyn now. And he works in acrylic, purely acrylic, sometimes on board, sometimes on paper, rarely on canvas, but
Never on
canvas.
That's an anomaly from an older.
That one. So that's the only canvas piece. Why don't we start there? Why those materials, and how do you decide when to work on board and when to work on paper?
They switch back and forth. The panels are required because they take a lot of physical abuse of print making, scraping, sometimes incising, and lots of layers.
Mhm.
So we have to take layers and very fluid paint that takes a while to dry. And once you're working on one thing that needs to sit around for a while, we transfer to paper sometimes, and sometimes it's just a stream of consciousness.
Mhm.
This will happen with this, but inside this will happen with the next work.
It's interesting because Lisa upstairs said that she turns to work on paper because it's easier in a way and it's more liberating. Do you have that sense as well, or is that a different approach?
It's the quality of the substrate, I guess, for me. The smooth aspect of the panel allows me to do a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And I use acrylic because it is so flexible. I mean, it can be very thick, very thin. And the paper usually has a really good tooth on it for the most part.
Mhm.
And that allows a lot of sedimentary things that make a good atmosphere.
But only acrylic all the time, never tempted by all the materials, again, that Lisa referenced that she uses, just acrylic.
It's the wheelhouse. Yeah, it's the wheelhouse. I've done it for about 30 years.
Mhm.
So it's very comfortable, and it still surprises me. It's still difficult.
Mhm. One of my favorite stories about you, I don't know if you remember this, but it was at one of your shows and we had an opening reception. You were talking to some people in front of a painting, or I was talking to someone in front of a painting, and I said, there are about a dozen layers of paint on this board. And then later you pulled me aside and said, actually, it's about 100 layers of paint. And that was amazing to me. Can you talk about that process of layering?
It's really evident in this work and some of these smaller ones where I've used paper towel as a printing medium for them. So this one is probably under 100, but they're all very thin, and it makes this beautiful translucence with the contrast of all the different colors. Fluorescent paint I started using about 2.5 years ago to heighten the color and just the experience of painting to see what these things can do. And I'm still stuck with them right now.
Fluorescence. I've noticed that a lot of painters during the pandemic have started to work with fluorescent colors, day glow colors. Was there a memo? Like what happened?
It was another option that I hadn't really considered before. So I'm always trying to evolve the work. Color is, of course, part of it, and color combinations are really important to me to make different things happen. Sometimes you fail miserably, whereas you go back at it again. But the results, when it's finished, I feel confident about the craziness that can happen.
Well, the colors are incredible, and I'd love you to talk a little bit more about the color, because like in this small piece here in the middle, it's always struck me as so courageous to take that sort of turquoise blue and put it against something as warm as that orangey red. How do you know when it works, when it's gonna sit well together?
It feels right. It's sort of the little person inside of you that makes the yes and no decisions. Will I eat another slice of pizza, or should I put a bunch of red here? Because you have to strategize, go against your normal way of making things.
I want to get to the content of all of these in a moment, but as we're sort of talking about form a little and technique, there's a tiny painting right there behind there called Interstice.
Yeah.
And that's the smallest painting in the show. And then we range all the way up to this one here, Greenland, I think is the largest piece. So again, playing with scale, you can pack so much into that tiny painting right there, almost as much in terms of elements as you do here.
It's proportion. Just balancing the proportion to the scale of the substrate.
Let's see. The importance of architecture in Jim's work is, of course, apparent. I think there's an architectural structure in almost every single one. And when I first met you, when you were doing Hedger and Wedger and these, the architectural forms sort of dominated the canvas or the panel. And now we've moved into a different period where sometimes there might not even be an architectural feature. Can you talk a little bit about how you make those decisions?
It's the same process of trying to find a new way to make paintings and having the organic aspect of the landscape alone without the architectural protagonists in the majority of them. It allows a different mood, a different feel of quiet. I like them to be, I try to make the paintings be very slow for the viewer, so they can take their time coursing through them. Hopefully they circle back all the time.
People also sometimes think you're an architect. I'm sure you hear that
It's really strange, yeah.
a lot, but your particular interest in the barn structure and houses and then fragmenting it. Again, where does that come from? Is that something you were always interested in interiors and exteriors?
The precision of sharpness that happens in some of them has always been part of who I am. But they're still empirical. I measure some of them out, and the others are taped out by hand and visually sort of analyzed as to where they may go. But the contrast of nature and architecture is a need of balance of the pictures themselves. To have hard edge, have multiple windows that in the later works have come to have multiple places of time and space for me. So I consider them each a little nodule of a world, with each window or reflection or even pool.
And are most of the landscapes fantasy-based, from your imagination? Do you sketch when you are out in nature?
Sketch, I photograph, I hybridize images I find on the internet, via chopping them up or Rorschaching them or taking tiny pieces from them and adding them to others to make its own structure.
So you're creating your own landscape in a sense, like a fantasy world. I really see that in Empyrean, which this to me is a masterpiece. It's my favorite in the show. I love it. And it because it looks like a place I want to be. I want to go there. And I think a lot of them have that quality. You recently introduced the moon. In your earlier work, you didn't have that. And that's such a symbol, of course. Can you talk about that specific picture a little?
The moon and I have a romance together.
Oh, yeah?
Just the light and the love and the changes of it. And it just makes me feel very calm, but also reminds me of how small we are. And that it's, sometimes I really have to take it out because it sort of wants to be there. It's part of, the romance of the painting itself. Taking a chance to make things. So I want to draw you in. I want you to stop and look because there are a lot of little tiny details in these works that require that.
And the water features as well, another
Lots of water.
element that's very important to you.
Water,
Reflection.
sky, clouds, reflections, sunsets. Idealized spaces that we've all encountered briefly, but in a painting, it sort of lasts for.
Right. Do you have a favorite piece in here? A story you want to tell us about any of them? In the making of them?
I mean, this is a favorite of a recent work. These three were all made at the same time. These two, they just gel together after a certain amount of time, and Lisa can speak to that in the sense of like you're pushing, you're there, and then it just happens, and then you know what to do, and then it's done. But all of them, I like them to have a bit of mystery, a bit of misunderstanding for the viewer. Things that don't make sense,
Right.
gravity-wise or pictorially with an image within an image, as in Forgotten Zeitgeist on the left, which is the left-hand purple sky painting of a tiny moon. It has that inserted reflection of a strange rectangle that's reflecting the mountain behind it and the sky into the water. And you have this darker overall feel to the painting, except for these two little spots, like an iceberg there, the sunset that brings out like a day in the same picture. So changing time within the paintings is very important to me as well.
And that all happening within one piece of paper or one panel at the same time. I think that ambiguity that you just said is what drew me to your work first. Because when you look at a James Yeshiva painting, you're shaken up a bit because you don't quite know what you're seeing. Is it inside? Is it outside? Is it day? Is it night? Is this water? Is this a reflection, or am I really looking at the thing? And that's what I love about your work, because we all want to be confused in that sort of good way, because it's challenging and it makes you have to look harder to think, what am I looking at? And why is it making me feel like this?
Yeah,
And
what it does for you as the viewer.
yeah, so that's just not how I feel, but I'm sure everyone has their own version of that. I also want to say that James is showing in our Hudson location in January 5th. The show opens, it's a Thursday. We have the reception January 6th. It's only a 2-hour train ride to Hudson. And he's going to be showing with a new artist for the gallery named Mike Childs, who also is sort of architecture-based work. And I have for years and years wanted to show Jim's work with Mike, so I'm very excited about that show. And we should now open up to some questions. Any or comments?
May I ask you please speak a little bit about the titles and the interplay between the composition and the titles?
The titles are.
If you want to cheat sheet.
The titles are usually the base before the painting starts. The majority of the time, it just gives me a context to then forget about what my content will be, because it changes so much when they're being made.
And how do you title them though before they're painted?
I think about it. I go through phases of thinking about. I make out titles, or find them, sniff them out, chop them up. Different titles or sentences that I read, and then I make a list. And then when a work starts to evolve, I'll take that title, put it on, and sometimes it changes. But it allows me, in my own context, in my head, to figure out the feel of the work, where I guess. So the painting to the left with the pink sky is called Whole, and that title is based on the split of this architectural puzzle that has opened up and has its own little set of worlds. Maybe I'll just go through the titles so it makes a little more sense. The next work is called Eternal Summer. Then we have Empyrean, Kauai, Traveler, Vinyl Haven, Greenland, Interlude. A little challenging for the older ones. I said Hedger. And then we have Forgotten Zeitgeist, Departure, and Idle Night. Idle Night is also one of my favorite paintings that I've done this past year. Kind of a little strange, surreal painting. I think of most of the works in the surreal zone of context because things don't make sense and pictorially they eventually make sense. So it allows you to go back and forth with them and put an ambivalent position of where things can be. The large painting of canvas is
Highlander.
Highlander. Always in the present. Trying to keep in the present. And then we have Illuminator in the corner, and then Interstice is the last painting, a tiny miniature on panel. Yeah, they're important to me in that way. It's not necessary that the viewer get a different impression just by the title, but I think it adds nuance to it, and it gives you a little bit of context to jump into the painting.
Do you ever make up a word for a title?
Illuminator I made up, Wedger I made up. There was several, but not recently. Now they're a little longer, or they're extremely accessible.
My mom is a painter and a sculptor, and she would just make up words for her titles. And I remember being a little kid and like, what does that mean? And she's like, I just like the sound. She would literally just put sounds together.
I kind of wondered that because I see her.
I know. Yeah, it's funny, right? And she would wait until the piece was finished and then determine what the sound should be to refer to it. Yeah. Those titles are fascinating, right?
For me, they're necessary. I can't do an untitled or a number series. It would drive me crazy.
Yeah. I also want to point out the starry skies in some of the paintings in this one over here. And in Idle Night, this third small one, it has a just crazy gorgeous night sky.
What little colors.
Yeah.
A little maddening.
Anything else?
Question.
Yes.
I believe I read you're from the Northeast. Right?
Yes, from Massachusetts originally.
But most of what we see here, we mentioned one was Kauai, and I found that immediately legible. But everything feels either otherworldly, like lunar, like that, or very like open expanses of the Western United States. So is that something that, you traveled a lot there, or you fantasize about that? How did that did you ever at some point like focus on the more northeastern sort of closed spaces?
It's a mix. It's a mix of reading and looking at all different kinds of images, from fashion to interior design, taking my own photographs of landscapes, and the interest in different geographies of what lives where. The Greenland painting was a completely different painting. It was all magenta. It was a disaster. And then I sanded the whole thing down and thought, I need to make something that represents this giant piece of land or a giant island. I'm really interested in islands, and chop it up like a film so that it kind of has that, these separate reels that are both ambiguous and they make sense, they don't make sense, and they go back and forth in a very quiet way. And it was actually quite a joy to make this painting because I love blues and greens. It's kind of like mostly what I wear in my clothing, or black, and I found them very calming, and it was fun to try to insert this other architectural piece within it, and its light, which is the only man-made aspect represented in the picture itself. But I look through all kinds of geography. I just did a painting based on what the Grand Canyon is like, even though I've never been. It's very psychedelic and very intense, chartreuse yellow and pinks.
Wow, that's great.
Come see that in Hudson.
That's fun. Yeah. And that's in January?
Yes,
Yeah, for a while.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.